Thank you so much for joining us today as we launch this wonderful book. It's really great to be moderating this panel here. And we have a very diverse panel here today, and I hope today we can have some valuable exchange of ideas to how we can get there and help Nepal move forward. Tej, let me start with you. How would you say Nepal should rebrand itself and create a new image of itself in the global arena?
Thank you, Pavan. I think that is the most pertinent question at the moment for this country to reckon with. I mean, working as an economist in Nepal, I see this country teeming with opportunities. It is an emerging country, is how I like to place it. So I think it's time that we come to terms with the fact that we're not a small, poor country. We're a fairly large population. We have a large market. We have a sizable GDP, which is growing. And there are growth, there are potentials for growth which are immense. So I think in that sense, Nepal needs to start, we ourselves as people of Nepal also need to start reorienting ourselves towards this positive mindset and be ready for this positive transformation that can be led.
I'd like to direct the next question to Shabda. With Dolma Impact Fund, you work very closely with the private sector. Right. What kind of reforms do you think is necessary so that the private sector catches up to that image?
Sure. Thank you, Pavan. I'm just going to talk about the reforms that's needed within the private sector. We've talked a lot about, about reform that's needed by the government, but within the private sector, I think the biggest reform that's needed is in corporate governance. We need to improve our transparency, accountability, and compliance. Private sector needs to be prepared to improve their corporate governance. The second is, this push is also coming from the banks. Banks of late have improved their underwriting standards, or they have been pressurized to improve their underwriting standards. You see credit rating happening for loans above 50 crores. That push will be coming from the banks too. The third is FDI. The first movers in Nepal would be development financial institutions. The last would also come from shareholders' activism. So how do we improve that? So I have a few points that I think would improve the corporate governance in the private sector. One is independence board. So board has to be separate from the management. The second is succession planning. The succession planning has to be done early. Third is proper and timely disclosure of financial statement. And the last, most important, is to groom the next generation leaders.
My next question with Diva. What is your observation in working with the young Nepali population and helping them with leadership qualities?
Definitely. I returned back to Nepal 2 years ago, so since then I've had an opportunity of working with a lot of young individuals in Nepal, and previous to that as well, I've worked with young individuals, young Nepali individuals in the US. A few observation that comes to my mind is Nepali people are incredibly talented. We've been hearing a lot about individuals being very successful outside of Nepal, and in Nepal as well, but the thing is, I don't think we as Nepali individuals know how to use that talent properly, and that's the most important thing. But at the same time, what I've also noticed here in Nepal, and especially in Kathmandu, is there are lots of programs that are directed towards developing skills of individuals, calling it the capacity development of individuals. However, what I've noticed is a lot of times they tend to only focus on knowledge, right? Be that getting the next degree, getting the next job, the next promotion that has to do with knowledge, but there isn't a lot of conversations or teachings around what it means to be curious, what it means to have a learning attitude, what it means to have a long-term vision and thinking from that perspective. Again, I would like to reiterate that it is a personal observation, is it's a glamorization of entrepreneurship in Nepal. Only way you can scale up and move forward is if you focus on developing the capacity of individuals, each individual in that enterprise, then you're going to grow, not just the idea and the enterprise itself. So it's essential to begin thinking about some of those things. And finally, I do want to say one more thing is, young people emulate what they see. So if we're not necessarily putting forth our best high standards, then they're going to follow that footsteps, and it's going to be a vicious cycle that will be very difficult for Nepal to come out of.
Shrinkala, you are a young, talented Nepali individual that many look up to. Do you feel that, you are challenging the idea of a Nepali person and a Nepali woman as well when you work?
Till now, whatever I've worked in and whenever I have entered into a new group of people, be it from the government level or whatever the field it might have been, especially this one factor that keeps on bugging me is that I'm not taken as seriously as I think I should have at first glance. One, because I come from a beauty pageant background. That's how people recognize me. Two, because I'm mostly seen as a mascot as such, like just a figure, just a face that's presented, and that's, I think, not enough sometimes. But that at the same time has given me opportunities because I'm not seen as a threat as such. So that gives me and opens more opportunities for me to speak at certain higher levels, and this whole platform of beauty pageant has given me more than direct access to more than 1 million active youth. Women should not just be ceremonial. We should not be the ceremonial 33% of the group, but the leading 33% or even 50% of the group. And whatever the access might have been for us to reach to that level, we need to really push it so that people start taking you seriously, even if they don't do at first. But it's up to you how you convince them. It's up to you how you use the platform that you have. And that's, I think, very important for all the women in Nepal currently to realize that we are as strong as the men in the group, and we are not just ceremonial there.
Tej, when we talk about FDI, there's a lot of focus always on, high volume investments, infrastructure projects, hydro, roads. What do you think Nepal needs to do to, strengthen its negotiating power as we take on these projects? And do you feel we need to look beyond them as well?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this country needs FDIs. Just in my previous slot, I talked about all the opportunities that we have, but at the same time, being an economist, as famously said, two-handed economist, on the one hand you have opportunities, but on the other you also have risks. Definitely, we need to look at FDI. This country needs FDI for sure to fill in the investment gaps. And you're very correct in pointing out that I think for the most part, FDIs have been looked at through the lens of infrastructure projects. And in a country like Nepal, I mean, you could forgive that, right? Because it's a country that is very infrastructure, it's hungry for infrastructure, it needs it to drive its economy. But we also need to start looking beyond FDI, beyond infrastructure. There's so many sectors in this country which could absorb a lot of capital and unleash potential in the respective areas. So while on the one hand we do need these large infrastructure projects, on the other we do need to also look at small but impactful investments from small and medium enterprises, which can have tremendous forward and backward linkages and really unleash a new wave of dynamism in the private sector.
Thank you. Shabda, I'm interested to hear what you have to say on this as well. What's your perspective on investment coming into this sector as well?
Just to add to what they said, like he correctly said, FDI should not be only focused on, high infrastructure projects. It should be, given as equal importance to small, investment coming in SMEs, investment coming in tech industries. Another thing that I want to discuss is, we should also encourage, foreign startups to come to Nepal, and, explore the Nepali market. This will do two things. One, it will create jobs, and it will also do, it will also transfer knowledge. The likes of Oyo or, Patao, what it will do is it will, transfer knowledge. It will, give trainings to youth here.
Deva, to add on to what he's talked about, tech startups where young Nepalis are venturing into, what kind of interventions would you say are critical to leverage the current bulge of youth population that we have right now in Nepal, and also motivate them to work here and sort of help or drive country's transformation?
Definitely. So I'm not an economist, so I'm gonna jump on your viewpoints about the importance of FDIs and investments and everything like that. But I can't help think that with the FDIs come the human capital as well, right? You can't just bring in money. Both of those things are equally important. And one of the things in the book was about how the foreign investors are not trusting of Nepal because of the human capital issue. So one of the most important interventions that we need to begin thinking now about is human incubation or human acceleration. And when I say human, I'm talking about each individual person, each individual Nepali. But in that case, I think there's both the supply side and demand side in terms of talking about human capability and capacity development. On the supply side, there are education institutions that are doing wonderful work, but then there's a lot of things that's also missing, right? But then at the same time, on the the demand side is basically the organizations, the companies, all the things that you guys were talking about, private sector, public sector, civil societies, all of those, they also need to focus on developing their capacity. So when we're talking about how do we bring that talent back into Nepal and how do we really sustain that long term, then you do need to invest on the people. You have to invest on the people because it might be a short-term investment, but it will have a long-term impact. So I think those are probably the most important aspects in terms of talking about intervention.
I'm curious to know what do organizations say when you offer them training opportunities, but they're not very open to that. What is their reasoning?
So I feel like people have a very myopic view of what training means. Training is confidence, and confidence equates to standing up on the stage here and being able to speak. That's not it. That's not the only skill you need, right? Or training is very technical. And technical skills are extremely important. Please don't misunderstand me. But then if you're not able to utilize the technical skills, if you're not able to pass on that information, communicate that well, train the staff members in your team, motivate them, build their capacity, then you're not really going to be able to do much. But what's interesting is after long conversations with the HR professionals, then they will ultimately go back to like, oh, they're not motivated, and then when we talk about leadership and the different things that we do in our work, they're like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what we need. But that's not, PowerPoint training or Excel or any of the other technical training. So it's quite interesting to hear where they are.
Shrinkala, as a person who engages with youth quite a lot, what are your observations on what motivates them to work in Nepal, and also on a personal level, what makes you hopeful about Nepal?
Every day I am meeting youth of different professions, and I'm meeting youth who have not taken the conventional approach towards life, and that surprises me every day. We are leading this green initiative where we have a group of youth who not just design parks, but we go and see what kind of budget is being allocated, and we see if it's being used well. So we are questioning the system, we are questioning how things were being run. So I see this in an everyday basis. And about the diaspora, what I feel like is they don't know, they still don't realize the optimism that the youth have today, and a very few are who can take risk and come back and start something new, and we are sitting amongst a few of them. So I feel it's a very exciting time. We have a great optimistic youth energy, and I'm very excited to see what we have to hold in future.
I would like to add on to that question because I think in the panel you're probably the most social media savvy person. What's your experience in putting out a message on social media and seeing real changes happen?
What I've also realized is that we youth are occupying the maximum of the population of our country at the moment, but the population of aware youth is fairly low. It's quite low, and we only depend on whatever we see on Instagram or Facebook for our daily consumption of whatever is happening around the globe, and especially in Nepal. Then I believe that that's the position that we all, people who are public figures, hold. We have a responsibility to transfer whatever knowledge we have, whatever knowledge we gain from panel discussions as such, or wherever we go, we learn something new every day, and that's how I try to utilize my platform.
Well, we have a very distinguished audience here with us today, and I think it would be unfair to confine our panel to just my questions. So I'll open the floor.
My question is to Shabdaji, and it's also bouncing off the kind of sentiments that Shankalaji expressed about optimism. I want to, because you highlighted a lot about the importance of corporate governance, I want to tie the element of human capital to corporate governance and ask if you could share stories, your favorite example of when a person who's not in authority at your organization has questioned somebody in authority.
Sure. Thank you for your question. I cannot share the details, but what I can share is, recently what has happened, I'll give you two examples of, corporate governance is also about ownership. So recently we were traveling to India to do some pitch with some of our companies to raise additional funds. So what had happened was the company is, startups are usually cash-strapped. So what happened was the CEO of the company and the CEO of the company was traveling with us. And then I was traveling with them. So since I was the director of the company, they said, you'll get your own room, but for others, I'm going to share that room. I think that's an example, and that made me realize that, that's ownership. The second example I want to give is about a company, like it's a general practice. We encourage whistleblowing. We encourage, that we have open door policies. So, every company we invest in, we have, we take the initiative to help them to write their employees' handbook if it's already not written. So, a lot of, the open gate, the open door policies where the CEO doors will already be open. You don't have to follow the hierarchy to reach to the CEO. If during the board meetings, every board meetings we have, or the committee meetings, what we do is, everybody has to speak. Especially, has to speak, doesn't matter what your designation is. So these are some examples that we are trying to.
I have one question around the discussion. How, in a country like ours, we move away from that old shared purpose of economic growth and where this discussion is more going into, to a newer shared purpose of progress versus development?
You're absolutely right. I think the economic models that have been in place in the post-war period, I mean, we've all seen the caveats of the model, irregular economic booms and downturns. All's well when everything's going well, but when the bust cycle comes in, you see tremendous poverty and human deprivation. And with globalization, that's gone global as well. At least in my generation, I feel like because you bring out the topic of millennials, and I think how we've grown is with the internet. We've had this chance to connect while we were growing up with people from different parts of the world, get exposed to value systems around the world, and not just, we don't just see the model of what our parents or grandparents or their parents did as the model to follow, the alternative lifestyles that we can lead. And the sense of belongingness itself, I see more and more it's with value systems rather than geographically determined value systems. So I feel like the youth in Nepal is very well exposed to these ideas as well. And I think as willing and able change agents, they will take this forward in making this new value system emerge, which is based on sustainability. We're creating an economy that is just and that works for all and not just for few. I think the youth of this country have that exposure to this idea, and it's up to us to really drive that home.
One of the things that really surprises me each time is starting salary, even for MBAs, are just 18,000 to 20,000. So it's very difficult for me to make a point to stay back in Nepal for those people. And if we're talking about youth, in everything we talk about, where does the labor factor in? What are some of your thoughts on how to retain people, not just with like, oh, stay here to develop Nepal, but like really look, your compensation is actually going to be better? Because I feel like that's where the kids that I mentor struggle.
That's something that I'm actually struggling with, so it's a great question, because that was one of the things that I was really surprised with when I returned back as well, the salary scale and everything associated with it. I'd like to tie this a little bit with Sikshit's question as well. When you talk about young people wanting to bring about change, and then talking about the enabling environment, and I think that's where we're lacking as a society, as a community, as a culture, as a whole. Really focusing on growing the capacity of the individuals that you have and bringing the money that you're earning back into them, investing it back into them is potentially one way to look at it.
Just wanted to add that, so we have introduced in one of our companies the stock option. But the issue is, it's a stock option, it needs to be triggered, right? So, but, the ecosystem, the capital, there's a paucity of capital. Again, so you will give stock options, but when can it be realized? That has not been tried and tested, but we have started experimenting with stock options. There are some taxation issues again, but we have started doing it.
We live in the same country where everything is so untouched that whatever business that they start in is going to be a pioneer at that. And that is a better option, a better road to take to create more jobs through your own organizations, through your own ventures. From a non-economist point of view, the MBAs should also focus on creating ideas and starting new ventures. I think that could help them attain a bigger earning that they expect to get.
With the last question, talk about the book a little bit. What is your takeaway from the book? And what is something that you found while you were reading that is essential for us to build on as we move forward?
Thank you. I mean, Sujeev in his book talks about how history in Nepal has typically been orally relayed, and we don't always have a lot of written history. My main takeaway from the book, I think it would be that I see the main message in this book being, it's an open moment for Nepal. And in this, I'm reminded of Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson in their book, Why Nations Fail. They talk about every nation at certain points come across certain critical junctures, and it's at these junctures where if we're able to build inclusive institutions, political, economic, social, then those countries sort of take a growth trajectory and become sustainable. From this book, what I see is that it's an open moment for us to really build on the phenomenal changes that we've had and we've been able to institutionalize in the last 10 years, and really move forward by building inclusive institutions to lay the foundations for a fair and sustainable economy.
For me, I've never studied economics, neither at school or college or high school, ever. And this book for me was something that brought me into the overall horizon of how history has shaped our country as a whole, how our geopolitical situation is affecting us at a daily basis, and how I myself am a part of the overall global economy. This book gave me such a vast perspective and overall perspective of everything that you need to know, especially for someone who is completely a layman in economics. So for me, this book was everything that I've always wanted to learn about. And for me, this was how we can shape our future and how I stand in the global economy. So thank you, Sujeev. Like, it's a wonderful book. Thank you.
For me, it was about, a particular chapter or particular, section. It was about, cartels is bad for Nepal. It's bad for the reputation of private sector, as well as it's a threat to capitalism. Cartels stifle innovation, but, they have to be careful because, likes of Sikshit, Tutul was the reason why, like in one sector the cartels were destroyed, or, he challenged it, right? So, that needs to be, the cartels or whoever are doing it, they need to be prepared by the disruption that the new technology, the youngs will bring in.
There are many things that I related with in the book. As I mentioned, I returned back to Nepal 2 years ago. I lived in the US for 13 years, and I feel like the second part of the book was literally what happened in the last 13 years in Nepal. So it was a really good way for me to understand the socio-economic political situations in Nepal. One of the sentences that I very vividly remember from the book is he basically said, "I don't know what Nepalis aspire to." And I related that very much to the experience I've had here for the last 2 years, plus of being away as well, is honestly, I don't think we know what we want. We talk about it, we discuss, sometimes as youth, sometimes as politicians, sometimes as entrepreneurship, sometimes as education, but I don't think we actually know what it is that we want and what it is that we're trying to be as a country. So the notion of the importance of rebranding the country that Tej also talked about very early on is probably a big takeaway for me. We're incredibly talented individuals with many of us outside of Nepal doing wonderful things. So it's time to bring all of that back together and really rebrand ourselves and our identity. I think that's probably the most important thing for me as someone who's trying to do the same thing as well.
Well, thank you so much, everyone on the panel. I hope this was a refreshing conversation where we talk about the opportunities and the potentials of Nepal. So let us unleash the Vajra, and I'll call Sujeev back on the stage, and we'll take our leave. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a wonderful audience.